Hello, my name is Travis Morgan. I am 32 years old. I am currently a lawyer working at a prestigious law firm in New York, where skyscrapers rise as if reaching for the clouds, and the pace of life never slows, even when night falls. New York is a symphony of honking cars, neon lights, and grand dreams, a place where you can become anyone, as long as you have enough courage and keep moving forward. But no matter how much I belong to this city, my heart always turns to one person, my grandmother, Elizabeth Morgan, the woman who shaped who I am today. As I sit here in my 27th floor apartment, looking through the glass window at the Hudson River glimmering with lights, memories of my grandmother flood back, like an old film full of color and emotion. She is not just family to me. She is a lighthouse guiding me through the storms of life. She is the chairwoman of the board of Morgan Hartfield, an empire in the private aviation and luxury transportation industry, headquartered in Dallas, Texas. But to me, she is not just a renowned businesswoman with million-dollar contracts or speeches that captivate international forums. To me, she is the storyteller of bedtime fairy tales, the one who taught me how to tie my shoelaces, and the one who always smiled gently even when the world turned its back on her. My grandmother taught me so much about the world out there. She instilled in me life philosophies and business ethics. She always emphasized that money and power are merely tools, not the purpose. A man is not measured by the money in his bank account, but by how he treats those less fortunate than himself, she said. I remember when I was 16, I asked her why she didn't fire an employee who had made a major mistake, costing the company millions of dollars. She looked at me, her eyes stern yet gentle, and replied, "Because he has a family to feed and because he showed remorse." Mistakes don't define a person, Travis. It's how they rise from them that shapes their worth. Those lessons led me to become a lawyer. I wanted to be a defender of justice, just as she always stood up for the values she believed in. I chose law not for the money, but because I wanted to do something meaningful. Just as she built Morgan Hartfield not only for profit, but to create jobs and provide safe, luxurious flights for millions of people. She is my ideal role model, the reason I stay up late working, the reason I never give up no matter how tough things get. I admire my grandmother immensely. She is not only a talented and successful woman, but also someone with a warm heart when she's with me and a strong spirit when needed. She is the only person in my family who makes me feel unconditionally loved. She never forced me to become anyone specific, but she always believed I could achieve anything. "You are my pride," she once said when I graduated from law school with honors. Those words I keep in my heart like the most precious treasure. Sitting here in my quiet apartment, I suddenly feel an overwhelming wave of longing. It's been 2 months since I last visited her in Dallas. The demands of work, back-to-back lawsuits, and the relentless pace of New York life have delayed my trip. I tell myself that this weekend I'll fly back. I want to sit by her side, listen to her stories of the old days, see her smile, and feel the warmth of her hand. But all those wishes vanished like morning mist with a phone call from my father, pulling me into a storm I was unprepared for. The phone rang, shattering the silence of my apartment. My father's number flashed on the screen. My heart pounded with a sense of dread. I picked up and his voice came through, cold and urgent. "Travis, your grandmother had a stroke. You need to come to Dallas immediately." I froze, my hand still gripping the phone. The world around me seemed to stop. My grandmother, the strong, invincible woman in my eyes, had a stroke. She is now lying in a hospital, teetering on the edge of life and death. Without time to think, I hurriedly packed a few things, booked the earliest flight, and rushed to the airport in the dead of night. On the flight to Dallas, I sat huddled in my seat, my mind blank, repeating one question over and over. Will I make it in time to tell her how much I love her? The flight lasted 3 hours, but to me it felt like an eternity. I stared out the window where white clouds drifted past under the faint moonlight, and a sense of helplessness gripped my chest. I tried to picture my grandmother, her gentle smile, sharp eyes, and warm voice. But those images were replaced by the thought of her lying motionless in a hospital bed, surrounded by IV lines and the beeping of machines. I blamed myself. Why did I let work consume me? Why didn't I visit her sooner? Those brief phone calls and hurried texts could never replace the real moments spent with her. When the plane landed at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, it was nearly dawn. I took a taxi straight to the hospital, ignoring the biting chill of the Texas morning and the exhaustion weighing down my eyelids. Only one thought occupied my mind. I had to get to her. Baylor Hospital, where she was being treated, loomed before me like a massive, cold, and unfamiliar structure. I rushed through the corridors, the smell of antiseptic stinging my nose, my heart pounding as I pushed open the door to the ICU waiting room. My father, David Morgan, stood there, arms crossed, his gaze fixed on the stark white wall. He wore a gray suit, his hair neatly combed, but I noticed his shoulders trembling slightly, as if he were trying to suppress something. Next to him was my Uncle Robert, his younger brother, the HR director of Morgan Hartfield, speaking quietly to his wife. Aunt Evelyn, with her blonde hair tied up in a high bun and red lipstick, looked like she had just stepped out of a gala rather than a hospital. They didn't notice me right away, and I didn't want to draw attention. I just wanted to know how my grandmother was. "Travis," my father said when he saw me, his voice low and dry. "You're here." "How's she doing?" I asked, skipping any pleasantries. My heart seemed to stop waiting for his answer. My father sighed, his eyes avoiding mine. "The doctor said it was a severe stroke. She's in the ICU now. They're doing everything they can, but—" He trailed off as if unwilling to continue. "But what?" I pressed, my voice trembling. "Only a 20% chance of survival," Uncle Robert interjected, his tone flat like he was reading a report. "And if she wakes up, she might be in a vegetative state. The brain damage is extensive." His words hit me like a knife to the heart. I staggered, grabbing the wall to steady myself. A vegetative state. My grandmother, the woman who ran an empire, who stood fearlessly before thousands of shareholders, could now be reduced to lying there, never speaking, never smiling again. I couldn't accept that. I wouldn't. "Where's the doctor? I want to see the doctor now," I said, my voice breaking. Evelyn placed a hand on my shoulder, her smile soft but laced with insincerity. "Travis, calm down. We're all worried. The doctor will be out soon." I brushed her hand off, not wanting anyone's comfort. I didn't need empty words. I needed my grandmother. I needed to know she'd be okay. I walked to the glass window looking into the ICU, where I could only see the vague shapes of nurses moving around. I wasn't allowed in, and that made me feel like I was being pushed out of her life. The next few hours passed in a haze. I sat on a hard plastic chair in the waiting room, my head in my hands, trying to block out the painful memories flooding back. I remembered the last time I saw her 2 months ago at her Dallas mansion. She was sitting in an armchair wearing an emerald green sweater, telling me about her plans to expand Morgan Hartfield into Asia. She was still sharp, still full of passion, even in her 70s. How could everything change so quickly? In just one night, one moment, my entire world seemed to collapse. The Morgan family began arriving at the hospital one by one, like actors stepping onto the stage of a play I wanted no part in. My Aunt Charlotte, the youngest sibling of my father and Uncle Robert, flew in from France, appearing in an expensive silk dress and a cloud of overpowering perfume. Her husband, Philippe, walked beside her, always maintaining a polite but distant demeanor. They hugged me, offering words of comfort, but their eyes felt insincere. There was something cold, as if they were assessing the situation rather than grieving. My father paced back and forth, constantly on the phone, talking about the company, shareholders, and the press. I overheard him mention controlling the narrative to prevent the stock price from dropping. I wanted to scream that this wasn't the time to think about business, but I held back. I didn't want to argue. Not now. Uncle Robert and Evelyn sat in a corner, whispering to each other. I caught the word "will" in their conversation and my heart stung again. Were they already thinking about that? while my grandmother was still fighting for her life. Anger surged within me, but I tried to suppress it. Maybe I was misunderstanding. Maybe they were just worried in their own way. The doctor finally appeared, a middle-aged man with a tired face but a calm voice. He led me and my father into a small meeting room where he explained my grandmother's condition. Mrs. Morgan suffered a severe brain hemorrhage. We've done what we can to stabilize her, but the damage is extensive. If she makes it through the next 48 hours, we'll have more hope. But I have to be honest, even if she wakes up, the chances of a full recovery are very low. My throat tightened. You mean, she'll never be the same? The doctor nodded slowly. We'll do everything we can, but you need to prepare for the worst. I left the meeting room with legs heavy as lead. My father patted my shoulder, but I felt no comfort. He only said, "We have to be strong, Travis. Your grandmother wouldn't want to see you fall apart." But I didn't want to be strong. I wanted to cry, to scream, to do something to pull her back from the edge of life and death. I returned to the waiting room, sat down, and tried to breathe deeply, but the memories kept flooding in, uncontrollable. I remembered summer mornings when my grandmother and I walked through her rose garden. She'd point at each flower, telling me their meanings. Red roses are for love, Travis, but white roses are for sincerity. I remembered how she held my hand, her thin but warm hand, as if promising she'd always be there. Now, with her lying in the ICU, I felt like I'd lost a piece of my soul. I wondered if I hadn't cherished her enough. Would I forever regret the times I didn't visit because I was too busy? I pulled out my phone and opened a photo from our last trip to Aspen. She stood on a mountainside, her scarf fluttering in the wind, her smile radiant like the sun. I swiped the screen, tears streaming down my face. The atmosphere in the waiting room grew heavier. The Morgan family was nearly all present now. Whispers began to surface, and I realized something that made my blood run cold. They weren't just talking about her. They were talking about the future of the company, the assets, the power. I heard Charlotte mention the will to Philippe, her voice low but sharp. Uncle Robert asked my father about leadership structure if the worst happens. Evelyn, with her fake smile, chimed in. We need to unite to protect the company, don't we? I sat there listening, a chill running down my spine. My grandmother was still fighting for her life, and they were already dividing her legacy? I wanted to stand up, to scream at them, but I held back. I didn't want to turn this waiting room into a battlefield, not now when she needed me most. I stood and walked out into the hallway, needing air to breathe. I told myself I wouldn't let them drag me into their game. I was her personal lawyer, the only one she trusted with her important legal documents. I knew about her will, about what she wanted, but I wouldn't say anything, not now. I just wanted to be by her side, to hold her hand, and to pray for a miracle. That night, memories of my grandmother flooded back like waves crashing on the shore. I remembered my childhood days, when I was just a curious little boy with wide eyes, clutching her hand tightly during our travels around the world. Every summer, she would take me aboard the family's private jet, a stunning Gulfstream G650 with pristine leather interiors and polished walnut wood, to explore new horizons. Once we landed in Paris, and I stood in awe before the Eiffel Tower while she told me about her time studying at the Sorbonne, where she fell in love with a poor artist but never dared to confess. Another time, we flew to Rome, and I tasted my first gelato on the steps of the Spanish Square while she sat beside me, watching with eyes full of love. Travis, she once said, life is like a flight. Sometimes it's smooth, sometimes it's turbulent, but what matters is that you keep a steady hand on the controls. 2 winters ago, she took me to Aspen to ski. I can still recall the biting cold as snowflakes landed on my nose and her infectious laughter when I tumbled down a slope. She never let me feel like a failure. Instead of scolding me, she pulled me up, brushed the snow off my jacket, and said, "Falling isn't scary, Travis. What's scary is when you don't dare to try again." Those words have stayed with me my entire life, serving as a compass whenever I face challenges. But not everything in my family was as perfect as those moments with her. The extended Morgan family is a world rife with gossip, ambition, and hidden calculations. My father, David Morgan, her eldest son, is the vice president of the corporation. He's a stern man who always placed high expectations on me, but I sense a quiet jealousy in him when he sees how close I am to my grandmother. Uncle Robert, my father's younger brother, is the HR director, always appearing affable, but I know he's skilled at masking his ambitions. Aunt Charlotte, my father's youngest sibling, lives in France with her husband, a French businessman named Philippe. She rarely returns to the US, but whenever she does, she brings an air of tension, as if she's quietly competing with her brothers. I've always kept my distance from them, not because I hate them, but because I feel the insincerity in how they treat each other, and sometimes even my grandmother. They show up to family gatherings with smiles on their faces, but I see the probing glances and veiled remarks. I don't want to be dragged into that vortex. To me, family is my grandmother, the warm moments spent with her, not the silent battles over power or money. My grandmother knew this. She once told me during a quiet evening when it was just the two of us sitting by the fireplace, "Travis, family isn't always a place where you find safety, but you have to learn to love them even when they disappoint you." I didn't fully grasp her meaning at the time, but I sensed a fleeting sadness in her voice. Perhaps she had long seen the cracks in our family but chose to stay silent, just as she always chose forgiveness over confrontation. Now, standing in the cold hospital corridor with the smell of antiseptic and the steady beeping from the ICU, my grandmother's words echoed in my mind. The cracks she once hinted at were no longer small fissures. They had become gaping chasms, and I was witnessing my family quietly transform the hospital waiting room into an unofficial boardroom where everyone schemed and vied for power before my grandmother even had a chance to wake up. I returned to the waiting room after hearing the doctor's update on her condition. There was no new information, just reassurances that they were closely monitoring her. I sat down, trying to focus on praying for her, but the atmosphere in the room felt suffocating. I tried to ignore it, to tune out the glances and whispers, but then Aunt Charlotte stood up and walked toward me, her smile failing to mask the tension in her eyes. "Travis, how are you holding up?" she asked, her voice sugary but laced with probing intent. "I know you're very close to your grandmother. You must be so worried." "I'm fine, Aunt Charlotte," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "I just want her to wake up." "Of course," she nodded, sitting down beside me. "But you know, while your grandmother is lying there, we need to think about the future. The company can't stop running. And the things she's left behind." I stiffened, feeling as if someone had poured ice water over me. "What do you mean?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Charlotte leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Travis, you're her personal lawyer. You must know about her will, right? I don't want to pressure you, but we need clarity. If something unexpected happens, the family needs to be prepared." I looked her in the eye, struggling to keep my anger in check. "Aunt Charlotte, my grandmother is still alive. I don't think now's the time to talk about her will." She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You're right, Travis. But reality is reality. We can't stay naive forever." I turned away, unwilling to continue the conversation, but before I could stand, my father approached, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Travis, come with me for a moment," he said, his voice firm. Reluctantly, I stood and followed him into the hallway. "You're my son," he began, his voice low but heavy with pressure. "And I know you have information about what your grandmother planned for her assets and the company. Now, more than ever, the family needs to stand together. You need to support me." "What do you mean, take your side? What do you want me to do?" I asked, unable to hide the bitterness in my voice. My father sighed, as if I were making things harder than necessary. "Travis, don't be naive. If your grandmother doesn't make it, or if she can't run the company anymore, there will be major changes. The shareholders will demand answers. We need to ensure Morgan Hartfield stays in the family's hands, in my hands. You're a lawyer. You know how complicated this can get. I looked at my father, a man I once admired but now felt like a stranger. Dad, she's still fighting in there. I don't want to think about the company or the will. I just want to pray for her to live. His brow furrowed, his gaze icy. Travis, do you think your grandmother would want you to just sit there and pray? She built an empire and she'd want us to protect it. You need to choose a side, Travis. Stand with me or you'll be pushed out. His words hit me like a punch to the chest. Choose a side? Family? I felt like I was being dragged into a game I wanted no part of. I turned away without responding and walked back to the waiting room. But the atmosphere there had shifted entirely. The whispered conversations were now more overt, no longer veiled. I overheard Uncle Robert telling Evelyn, "If the will isn't clear, we need to act fast. We can't let everything fall into the hands of outsiders." Evelyn nodded, her eyes flicking toward me as if I were an obstacle to be removed. I felt surrounded. They knew I was my grandmother's personal lawyer, the only one privy to her critical legal documents. I had helped her draft her will, read through the clauses she wrote with care and love for her family. But now I realized they didn't care about her love. They only wanted their share, stocks, real estate, control. And I, because I was closest to her, had become the focal point of their suspicion and pressure. The days that followed were a relentless series of legal discussions. Each family member found ways to approach me using promises, veiled threats, or emotional appeals to extract information. My father spoke of my duty as a son. Uncle Robert talked about my responsibility to her legacy. Evelyn tried to cozy up, spinning tales of family bonds that I knew were hollow. Only my memories of my grandmother and me were real. But the family's presence in the hospital didn't last long. After just 3 days, the atmosphere in the waiting room shifted. My father, David, received a call from the company, and I overheard him mention something about an emergency shareholder meeting. He patted my shoulder, saying curtly, "Travis, I have some business at the company. Stay here with your grandmother and keep me updated." Then he left without looking back. Uncle Robert and Evelyn didn't stay much longer either. They left the hospital by the end of the second day, leaving me with a sense of emptiness and bitterness. Aunt Charlotte and Philippe disappeared even faster. And so the hospital became strangely quiet, but that silence only deepened my loneliness. I was the only one left, keeping vigil by the ICU's glass window where my grandmother lay. I didn't leave, didn't want to leave. Each day I sat on the hard plastic chair, clutching her sweater, the faint scent of roses and sandalwood still lingering. I whispered to her through the glass, telling her about my days in New York, the cases I'd won, the dreams I'd never shared with anyone else. "Grandma, I'm here," I said, my voice choking. "I'm not going anywhere." The days dragged on in agonizing anticipation. The doctors delivered the same updates. "Her condition is stable, but there's no progress." They told me her chances of waking up were slim, that I should prepare for the worst. But I couldn't accept that. I couldn't imagine a world without my grandmother, the woman who taught me to get up after every fall, who gave me a reason to become a lawyer, who always believed in me unconditionally. I slept on hospital chairs, ate hasty meals from vending machines, and ignored every call from my law firm in New York. Work could wait, but my grandmother couldn't. I didn't want to miss a single moment, didn't want to miss the chance to see her open her eyes. Each night I held her sweater, seeking comfort in its familiar scent. At times I felt like she could hear me, as if she were fighting to come back. Then on the morning of her second week in the hospital, a miracle happened. I was sitting by the glass, head bowed, eyes blurred from lack of sleep, when a nurse rushed over, her voice urgent but filled with hope. "Mr. Morgan, the doctor needs to see you right away. Mrs. Elizabeth, she's awake." My heart stopped. I leapt to my feet, following the nurse, my heart pounding in my chest. When I reached the ICU, the head doctor was there, a rare smile on his face. "She's opened her eyes," he said. "She's weak, very weak, but she's conscious, and she's asking for you." I stepped into the room, tears streaming down my face, unstoppable. My grandmother lay there, frail and pale, IV lines wrapping around her like threads of fate. But her eyes, those sharp, determined eyes, still sparkled when they met mine. "Travis," she whispered, her voice faint but clear. "My dear grandson." I knelt by her bedside, grasping her thin hand. "Grandma, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." I wanted to say more, to tell her how scared I'd been, how much I loved her, but my throat tightened, and only tears rolled down my cheeks. She smiled, a weak but warm smile, like sunlight breaking through after a storm. "Don't cry, Travis," she said. "I'm not ready to die yet." I stayed by her side all day, never leaving her. I told her about the days I spent outside the ICU, talking to her through the glass, how I refused to leave despite the world trying to pull me away. She listened, sometimes nodding, sometimes closing her eyes as if resting, but I knew she was listening. It felt like I was back in the old days, just her and me, no scheming, no suspicious glances. That night, she held my hand, pulling me closer. "Travis," she whispered, her voice more serious. "Tell me everything. What happened while I was here?" I hesitated. I didn't want to upset her, didn't want her to know that her family had left after just 3 days, that they'd started plotting over her will and power while she was still fighting death. But her eyes, sharp, resolute, made it impossible to hide anything. I sat down and told her everything. I told her how they'd mentioned the will, the shares, the control, as if she were already gone. She didn't speak, just looked at me, her gaze contemplative. After a long silence, she sighed, her voice low but firm. "Travis, do you remember what I told you? Family isn't always a safe place." I nodded, a chill running down my spine. "I remember." She closed her eyes as if deep in thought. When she opened them, there was a strange light in them. Not the fragility of someone who'd just escaped death, but the resolve of someone ready to face the world. "Travis," she said, "I want to test them. One last time." I was stunned. "Test them? What do you mean?" She smiled, a smile both gentle and sharp, like the way she used to face opponents in the boardroom. "I want to know who they really are when they think I'm no longer in control. You'll help me, won't you?" I nodded, though I didn't fully understand her plan. But I trusted her, as I always had. "I'll do whatever you want." She squeezed my hand, her voice turning stern. "Good. Now listen. You'll draft a fake will. All the assets, shares, properties, control. Leave everything to you. No one else gets anything." My eyes widened, my heart racing. "Grandma, are you sure? If I do this, the family will—" "React," she interrupted, her voice calm but commanding. "And that's exactly what I want to see. I want to know what they'll do when they think they've lost everything. You can do this, right?" I swallowed hard, feeling like I was stepping into a dangerous game, but I nodded. "I'll do it, Grandma." She nodded, satisfied, then gestured for me to call the doctor. When he arrived, she requested a private conversation with him and a trusted nurse. I stood outside, but I overheard her mentioning pretending to slip back into a vegetative state. I couldn't believe my ears. My grandmother, who had just woken from a stroke, was devising a bold plan to test her children. That night, I went to a hotel near the hospital, opened my laptop, and began drafting the fake will. My hands trembled as I typed each word, but I couldn't help feeling a spark of excitement. My grandmother had always been a master strategist, and now she was turning the family into her chessboard. The will was meticulously crafted, its legal language airtight, leaving no loopholes. All assets, from the Dallas mansion to the Morgan Hartfield shares, from Swiss bank accounts to the fleet of private jets, were bequeathed to me, Travis Morgan, with me taking over as chairman of the board. I sent the draft to her via encrypted email as she'd requested. The next morning, I returned to the hospital, and she had signed the fake will in the presence of the trusted nurse and doctor. She looked at me, her eyes both gentle and piercing. "Travis, she said. "Things will get difficult from now on. But I trust you. You're the only one I can rely on." I nodded, feeling the weight of an enormous responsibility. "I won't let you down." She smiled. The doctors were instructed to keep the plan secret, and they agreed, not only out of respect for her, but because she promised financial support for the hospital after her recovery. The plan was set in motion discreetly, and I felt like I had just stepped into a dangerous play, where I was not only an actor, but also the one holding the script. I left the ICU, my heart heavy but filled with resolve. I knew that when the fake will was revealed, the family would erupt. I had to prepare for angry glares, accusations, and even legal battles. But I wasn't afraid, because by my side was my grandmother, the strongest woman I'd ever known, ready to risk everything to see the true hearts of those around her. I returned to the hotel, my hand still clutching the fake will my grandmother had signed. Though it was just a piece of paper, a fabrication, it felt like a ticking time bomb, ready to shatter the masks my family had worn for years. I sat at my laptop, reviewing every sentence, every word, ensuring there were no legal loopholes. I knew that when this was revealed, all eyes would turn to me, and I needed to be ready for the storm ahead. My grandmother had instructed me to summon the family to the hospital over the weekend, under the pretense of updating them on her health. I sent emails to my father, Uncle Robert, Aunt Charlotte, and Evelyn, stating that I had something important to discuss. I deliberately kept the tone neutral, giving no hint about the will, but inside I felt a mix of anticipation and dread. I was stepping into a chess game designed by my grandmother, and I was the one moving the pieces. The only question was whether I had the strength to face what was coming. The weekend arrived faster than I expected. I stood in a small hospital meeting room arranged by the doctor for this family gathering. The air was cold, the smell of antiseptic lingered, and the fluorescent lights stung my eyes. I stood at the head of the table, clutching the fake will, waiting. My father arrived first, his gray suit as immaculate as ever, but his eyes were filled with suspicion. "Travis, what is this about?" he asked, his voice low but sharp. "I hope you're not about to do something foolish." I didn't respond, just nodded and gestured for him to sit. Uncle Robert and Evelyn arrived next, Evelyn in a striking red dress as if she were attending a gala rather than a hospital meeting. Robert maintained a calm demeanor, but I noticed his hand gripping the chair tightly, as if holding something back. Aunt Charlotte and Philippe arrived last. She wore an emerald silk dress, her hair neatly pinned up, her smile unable to hide her tension. "Travis, why did you call us here?" she asked, her voice sweet but probing. "How's your grandmother doing?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "Thank you all for coming. I know you're busy, but this is important. It's about Grandma and her will." The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. My father's eyes sharpened, like a predator sensing danger. Evelyn sat up straighter, her smile vanishing. Charlotte exchanged a glance with Philippe, while Robert cleared his throat as if masking his unease. I knew what they were thinking. They'd been waiting for this moment, but none of them expected it to come so soon. "I'm Grandma Elizabeth's personal lawyer," I continued, my voice even but firm. "Before she fell into this condition, she entrusted me with handling her will. And now, at her request, I'm going to disclose its contents." I opened the envelope, pulled out the fake will, and began reading. I tried to keep my voice steady, though my heart pounded like it might burst. According to the will, drafted and signed by Mrs. Elizabeth Morgan, all assets, including shares in Morgan Hartfield, properties in Dallas, New York, and internationally, bank accounts and control of the company, will be transferred to Travis Morgan, that is me, with the condition that I assume the role of chairman of the board. Silence. A deathly silence enveloped the room. I looked up, meeting each family member's gaze. My father sat motionless, his face pale as if he'd been slapped. Charlotte gripped Philippe's hand tightly. Robert was the first to break the silence, his voice trembling with anger. "What kind of joke is this, Travis? She couldn't have done this. Impossible." "This is no joke," I replied, striving to remain calm. This is the will she signed, witnessed by 2 individuals and notarized. I'm only fulfilling my duty." My father shot to his feet, his chair crashing backward. "Travis, how dare you?" he roared. "You dare betray me behind my back? Who do you think you are, taking everything? You think I'll let you get away with this?" I met his gaze, feeling like my heart was being crushed. "Dad, this isn't my decision, it's Grandma's." "Grandma's decision?" he snapped. "She's lying unconscious in the ICU, Travis. How could she have signed this? What did you do? Forge the will?" His accusation cut like a knife. I knew he'd react, but hearing him call me an honest lawyer, a fraud, still stung. "Dad, I didn't forge anything," I said, my voice low but resolute. "She signed this will beforehand. I'm only following her wishes." Charlotte jumped in, her voice sharp as a blade. "Travis, do you think we're fools? There's no way she'd leave everything to you. You're just her grandson, not her child. We're her children, we have rights." She turned to Philippe, seeking support. "Philippe, you see this, it's a scam." Philippe nodded, his tone calm but cold. "Travis, you'll need to prove the legality of this will. Otherwise, we'll take this to court." Evelyn chimed in. "Travis, you're tearing this family apart. You know that, right? If you work with us, we can negotiate, divide the assets fairly. There's no need to drag this to court." I stood there, surrounded by accusations, angry glares, and threats, but I didn't waver. I thought of my grandmother, of the sharp look in her eyes when she asked me to carry out this plan. I knew she was watching me, even as she lay in the ICU, pretending to be in a vegetative state. I couldn't let her down. "I'm not trying to destroy the family," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I'm doing what Grandma asked. If you don't agree, you can take it to court. I'm ready." Robert stood, pointing at me. "You'll regret this, Travis. You think you can stand against the whole family alone? We'll dig into her mental health records. If she wasn't of sound mind when she signed this, it's invalid." His words chilled me. Were they really willing to go that far? To smear my grandmother, the woman who built an empire for them, just to fight for her wealth? Anger surged within me, but I held it back. "Do what you think is right," I said coldly. "But I'll protect Grandma's wishes." The meeting ended in chaos. My father stormed out first, not saying another word, but his glare could have burned through me. Charlotte and Philippe whispered to each other, their eyes calculating. Robert and Evelyn lingered, trying to persuade me to redistribute the assets, but I refused. I left the meeting room, feeling like I'd just walked out of a battlefield. In the days that followed, the family became a war zone. My father called, demanding I retract the will, threatening to hire the best lawyers to sue me. Charlotte emailed, informing me she'd contacted a New York law firm to verify the legality of the will. Evelyn sent messages pretending to care about me, but I knew she was just fishing for information. I felt besieged from all sides like a hunted animal. But what hurt most wasn't the accusations or threats. It was the realization that my family, the people my grandmother had loved and sacrificed for her entire life, was ready to turn their backs on her, on me, for money and power. I sat in my hotel room looking out at Dallas's glittering skyline and felt a profound loneliness. I wondered if my grandmother had ever felt this way when she realized her children weren't what she'd hoped they'd be. Each day I returned to the hospital to care for my grandmother. I updated her with important details but avoided specifics to spare her any pain. She lay there listening, nodding as if everything unfolding was part of her calculations. Her eyes, though weak, still gleamed with sharpness, reminding me that she was never one to be easily defeated. I held her hand, feeling the faint warmth from her frail fingers, and vowed not to let her down. But the storm we had set in motion was growing, and I knew I was about to face challenges greater than ever before. After the announcement of the fake will, the Morgan family quickly shifted from anger to action. Just 4 days later, I received an email from a prestigious Dallas law firm, informing me that my father, Uncle Robert, and Aunt Charlotte had officially filed a lawsuit against me. They accused me of forging the will, exploiting my grandmother's health to seize the family's assets. The accusation cut like a knife, not just because it targeted me, but because it tarnished the trust she had placed in me. I sat in my hotel room rereading the legal letter, feeling like the whole world was against me. I called my father, hoping to talk directly, but he didn't pick up. Instead, I received a curt text. "Travis, you chose the wrong side. Don't blame me." The message stung my heart. I hadn't chosen any side. I was only following my grandmother's wishes, but to him that didn't seem to matter. The media soon got involved. One morning, as I left the hospital to grab coffee, I saw my name plastered on the front page of a local business newspaper. Morgan Hartfield family feud. Grandson accused of seizing aviation empire. The article quoted sources close to the family, claiming I had manipulated the will as my grandmother's personal lawyer. They called me an opportunist, a family betrayer. I threw the paper in the trash, but the sting of being vilified clung to me like a shadow. In the days that followed, I began preparing for the lawsuit. I contacted a colleague in New York, a lawyer specializing in wills and estates, for advice. He warned me that the family might request an evaluation of my grandmother's mental capacity at the time the will was signed, and if they could prove she wasn't of sound mind, the will, even though fake, would be invalidated. I knew that wasn't an issue, as my grandmother was fully aware and orchestrating this entire plan, but I couldn't reveal the truth. I had to play this game by her rules. Meanwhile, the Morgan family continued to reveal their true colors. Evelyn called me, her voice sweet but dripping with calculation. "Travis, you don't need to make this messier than it already is. If you agree to share the assets, we can settle this quietly." I refused outright, and her tone shifted to a threat, warning that I'd lose everything if I kept resisting. Charlotte sent a long letter recounting childhood memories with me, as if trying to tug at my emotions. But I saw through her true intent. She wanted me to back down. As the court date approached, the pressure weighed heavily on me. The media kept reporting, turning our family's story into a public drama. Morgan Hartfield's shareholders began raising questions, and the company's stock price fluctuated wildly. I received an email from a board member demanding clarity on the situation. I responded briefly that everything would be resolved in court, but deep down, I knew I was walking a tightrope. Each night I returned to my hotel, sitting alone in the dark room looking out at Dallas's glittering skyline. I questioned whether I had the strength to keep going. I wasn't just fighting my family, but also my own fears. Fear of hurting my grandmother, fear of failing to protect her legacy. But every morning when I returned to the hospital and held her hand, I found strength. She was the reason I was here, and I wouldn't give up. The trial was scheduled for a dreary, rainy day in Dallas. I stepped into the courtroom, my black suit immaculate but my heart heavy. Inside, the Morgan family was fully assembled. My father sat in the front row, his gaze icy. Uncle Robert and Evelyn whispered with their lawyer, a tall man with a confident smile. Aunt Charlotte and Philippe sat in a corner, she in an elegant black dress, but her eyes brimming with tension. The courtroom's atmosphere was stifling, as if all the resentment and ambition of my family had fused into a toxic cloud. I sat at the defendant's table beside my lawyer, the colleague from New York who had agreed to assist me. He whispered, "Travis, just stay calm. We've got this under control." But I wasn't sure I could stay calm. This wasn't just a lawsuit, it was a battle between my loyalty to my grandmother and the betrayal of those closest to me. The family's lawyer stood, launching into his argument. He called the will a blatant fraud, accusing me of exploiting my grandmother's health to draft a forged document. He presented medical reports arguing that she couldn't have been of sound mind when signing the will, and demanded the court declare it invalid. I sat there listening to each accusation, feeling as if I were being stripped bare before the world. But I didn't waver. I knew the truth, and I knew my grandmother was counting on me. When my turn came, I stood and stated that the will had been signed before her hospitalization, bearing the signatures of 2 witnesses and a notary. I emphasized that I was only fulfilling my duty as her personal lawyer. But I didn't mention the truth, that she was conscious and that this was part of her plan to test their loyalty. I couldn't, because she had asked me to keep it secret. The trial dragged on for hours with heated arguments from both sides. I saw my father's disappointed gaze as if I had betrayed him. Charlotte whispered constantly to Philippe, her eyes calculating. Robert sat silently, but I knew he was waiting for the moment to deliver a final blow. As the judge prepared to gavel the first day of the trial to a close, the courtroom door swung open. The air seemed to freeze. I turned and my heart pounded as I saw my grandmother, Elizabeth Morgan, being wheeled in by a nurse. She wore a hospital gown, her face pale but her eyes as sharp as ever. The room erupted in shocked whispers. My father stood abruptly, his face ashen. Charlotte gripped Philippe's hand, her mouth agape but speechless. Robert and Evelyn exchanged glances, their eyes filled with fear. The judge, though clearly caught off guard, quickly regained composure. He struck the gavel, calling for silence. "Mrs. Morgan," he said, his voice low but respectful, "do you have something to present to the court?" My grandmother nodded, her frail hand gripping the armrests of her wheelchair. Her voice was weak but clear, each word striking the stifling silence like a hammer. "Your Honor, I'm not dead yet, but it seems many in my family have let their integrity die long ago." Her words sent a jolt through the room. I saw my father stagger back as if struck in the chest. Charlotte bowed her head, her hands clenched so tightly her knuckles turned white. Robert coughed, trying to mask his panic, while Evelyn stared at the floor as if hoping to escape my grandmother's piercing gaze. I stood there, my heart racing, torn between pride and heartache. My grandmother, who had just escaped the brink of death, was still the strongest woman I'd ever known. She continued, her voice slow but commanding. "I woke up 2 weeks ago, and I heard everything. The accusations, the schemes, the plans to divide my assets while I was still fighting to live. I asked Travis to announce a fake will to test my children's hearts. And you've shown me exactly who you are." The courtroom fell silent, the only sound the steady patter of rain against the windows. I looked at her, my heart gripped by a mix of emotions, admiration, pain, and a touch of relief. Her plan had worked. My family, whom she had loved and sacrificed for her entire life, had exposed their greed and selfishness. She raised her hand, signaling the nurse to produce a small USB drive. "I recorded everything," she said, her voice cold as steel. "The conversations in the hospital, the whispers about the will, the shares, the power. I want the court to review these videos to see how those who call themselves my family acted when they thought I was gone." The nurse connected the USB to the courtroom projector. A large screen lit up and the footage began to play. I saw the hospital waiting room again, where the family had gathered for those brief 2 days. I heard my father whispering to a financial advisor over the phone, "If she doesn't wake up, we need to act fast. We can't let Travis take everything." I saw Charlotte speaking to Philippe, her voice sharp. "We need to hire a lawyer now. Travis can't get it all." And I heard Robert telling Evelyn, "If the will leaves everything to Travis, we'll dig into Mom's mental health records. She couldn't have been sane when she signed it." Each clip was like a knife to my heart. I knew they had been scheming, but seeing them openly discuss dividing my grandmother's assets, slandering her, filled me with both anger and disappointment. I glanced at my family, and for the first time I saw shame on their faces. My father bowed his head, covering his face with his hands. Charlotte bit her lip, trying to hold back tears. Robert shook his head as if unable to believe he'd been caught. My grandmother continued, her voice unwavering. "I drafted a real will 2 years ago, signed in the presence of lawyers and a notary. In it, I divided my assets equally among my children, David, Robert, Charlotte, but with conditions. You had to prove you were worthy of this legacy, not just through ability, but through loyalty and love for this family. But what I've seen today tells me I was wrong to place my trust in you." My father stood, his voice trembling. "Mom, I was just trying to protect the company. I didn't—" "Enough, David," she cut him off, her voice sharp as a blade. Protect the company or your own interests? You left the hospital after 2 days, leaving Travis alone. You sued your own son, called him a fraud just because you feared losing what you thought you deserved. My father fell silent, sitting back down, unable to meet her gaze. I saw his eyes redden, but I wasn't sure if it was remorse or merely humiliation. She turned to Charlotte. Charlotte, you flew in from France but left as soon as you thought there was nothing left to gain. You hired lawyers to sue your nephew instead of staying by my side. Charlotte opened her mouth to speak but then fell silent, bowing her head. Finally, she looked at Robert and Evelyn. Robert, you were the one I had the highest hopes for. But you were ready to dig into my mental health records just to get what you wanted. And Evelyn, you egged your husband on thinking I didn't know. Evelyn burst into tears, but no one in the room showed sympathy. They had put themselves in this position, and now they had to face the consequences. My grandmother turned to me, her gaze softening. Travis was the only one who stayed by my side day after day when all of you left. Travis never asked about the will, never schemed. That's why in my real will I've entrusted Travis with the leadership and oversight of Morgan Hartfield. Not because I don't love you, but because I know Travis will protect what I've built. Not just for the family, but for everyone who works at the company. Tears welled up in my eyes, but I fought to hold them back. I didn't want the assets or the power. I only wanted my grandmother to be proud of me, and now I knew she had always trusted me. After reviewing the videos, the judge declared the lawsuit against me dismissed. He also confirmed that my grandmother's real will, drafted 2 years prior, was legal and binding. The Morgan family had nothing left to contest. They had lost, not just in court, but in their own integrity. As the trial concluded, my grandmother requested to be taken back to the hospital. I walked beside her, holding her hand, feeling as if I had just emerged from a nightmare. In the car, she looked at me, offering a faint smile. Travis, you did well, she said. I knew you wouldn't let me down. I leaned down, kissing her forehead. I just want you to get better, I whispered. I don't need anything else. She squeezed my hand tighter, her eyes gleaming. You are my true legacy, Travis. As we left the courtroom, I saw my father standing alone in the hallway, his gaze lost. Charlotte and Philippe had left without a word. Robert and Evelyn hurried to their car, as if fleeing from the truth. The Morgan family, once united under my grandmother's guidance, had crumbled, leaving behind fragments of greed and betrayal. I wheeled my grandmother back to the hospital, my heart both relieved and aching. Relieved because the truth had been revealed, aching because my family had destroyed itself. But beside my grandmother, I knew I had done the right thing, and that was all I needed. The Dallas rain continued to fall steadily, cloaking the city in a gray mist, as if trying to conceal the fractured remains of the Morgan family. I wheeled my grandmother through the hospital corridor, the soft hum of the wheelchair blending with the sound of rain outside. She was silent, her eyes gazing into the distance as if reflecting on what had just transpired in the courtroom. I wanted to ask how she felt, to know if she was as heartbroken as I was, but I didn't dare. I feared the truth had hurt her more than she let on. In the days following the trial, the consequences rippled outward like waves on a lake. The Morgan Hartfield Board of Directors called an emergency meeting, and I was invited as the person my grandmother had designated to oversee the company. I sat at the head of the conference table, facing the scrutinizing gazes of the shareholders. They had seen the courtroom videos, read the articles about the Morgan Hartfield family feud. They no longer trusted my father or Uncle Robert. An elderly shareholder who had worked with my grandmother since the company's early days stood and spoke bluntly. David and Robert let greed cloud their judgment. We need new leadership, people who put the company's interests above personal gain. The meeting ended with a near unanimous decision. My father and Uncle Robert were removed from their leadership roles at Morgan Hartfield. My father, once the vice president, and Robert, once the HR director, were now mere names on the shareholder list, stripped of power. I watched my father leave the meeting room, His shoulders slumped, his eyes lost, as if he had lost everything that defined him. I wanted to run after him, to say something to comfort him, but I couldn't. Not after what he'd done. Suing me, calling me a fraud, and most importantly, abandoning my grandmother when she needed him most. Charlotte and Philippe vanished from Dallas immediately after the trial. She sent me a brief message. "Travis, I'm sorry. I hope one day you'll forgive me." I read it but didn't reply. I didn't know if I could forgive her, not because I was angry, but because I no longer saw her as family. Family, to me, was now just my grandmother. Robert and Evelyn left Dallas soon after, moving to an apartment in Houston, far from the prying eyes of the media and the whispers of the business world. Evelyn called me once, her voice trembling, saying she just wanted to fix things. But I didn't know how to fix something when trust had shattered. I only said, "Evelyn, live well with Robert. That's what Grandma would want." Then I hung up, feeling as if I'd closed a door forever. The Morgan family, once a symbol of unity and success, had disintegrated. No more elegant tea parties, no more family vacations in Aspen or Europe. We stopped speaking to each other like strangers who had crossed paths for a fleeting moment in life. I didn't know if we'd ever reconcile, but for now I had no hope for it. I took on the temporary leadership of Morgan Hartfield as per my grandmother's wishes. The job was far from easy. I faced tense meetings, shareholder questions, and unrelenting pressure from a media that wouldn't let our family's story die. But each day I visited the hospital, sat by my grandmother's side, and told her about my work. She smiled, her eyes shining with pride. "Travis," she once said, her voice weak but warm, "you're the only one I trust to carry on what I've built." Those afternoons with her became my healing balm. We didn't talk about the trial or the family, only about simple things, like how she taught me to tie my shoes or how she brewed tea the proper English way. I kept the test of loyalty she'd orchestrated a secret, a bond just between us. It was how we protected each other, safeguarding what remained of our family tie. My grandmother gradually recovered, but the doctors said she'd never be as strong as before. She accepted this with the serene grace I always admired. "Travis," she said one day as we sat by a hospital window overlooking the garden, "life isn't about living forever. It's about living right." I nodded, holding her hand, and felt a peace I hadn't known in weeks. But I still carried a scar. My family had fallen apart, and though I didn't regret what I'd done, it hurt to think of my father, Charlotte, Robert, and Evelyn. I wondered if they ever felt remorse or if they simply carried on with their greed and selfishness. I had no answers, and perhaps I never would. I sat in my new office at Morgan Hartfield's headquarters, looking out at Dallas's dazzling skyline. A portrait of my grandmother hung prominently on the wall, her eyes in the painting watching over me, both gentle and stern. Each time I looked at it, I remembered her voice, her lessons, and the bold loyalty test that had changed everything. I stood and stepped onto the balcony, feeling the cool night breeze. A sense of peace washed over me, not because I'd won the family battle, but because I'd protected the person I loved most. I wasn't rich because of the wealth my grandmother left behind. I was rich because of the lesson she taught me about human nature in her final days. She showed me that family isn't just blood. It's loyalty, love, and the moments you're willing to sacrifice for others without expecting anything in return. My grandmother built Morgan Hartfield not just to make money, but to create a legacy of trust, integrity, and responsibility. And now I carried the duty to continue that legacy, not just for her, but for everyone who worked at the company and believed in me. I thought of my father, Charlotte, Robert, and Evelyn. They were now faint shadows in my life. I didn't hate them, but I no longer held hope for reconciliation. Perhaps one day we'd meet again, talk, and find a way to heal the wounds. But for now, I focused on what my grandmother had taught me: to live right, to love sincerely, and to never let greed blind me. Every afternoon, I still visited the hospital, bringing a bouquet of white roses, her favorite. I sat by her side, telling her about the company, new plans, and the dreams I was pursuing. She listened, smiled, and sometimes held my hand, as if to say she was still there, still my guiding lighthouse. One evening, as the sunset bathed the hospital garden in gold, my grandmother looked at me, her eyes shining like they did in the old days. "Travis," she said, "you are my true legacy. Not the company, not the money, but you, a man who knows how to love and stay loyal." I leaned down, kissed her forehead, tears silently falling. "I love you, Grandma," I whispered. "Thank you for everything." I left the hospital looking up at the starry night sky. Dallas remained vibrant, ever moving, but in my heart, there was only stillness. I had lost a family, but I had kept what mattered most, my grandmother's love and trust, and that, to me, was the most precious legacy of all. 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 Legacy of all.